I might have your attention, please. I'm Katie Singer. I'm in the Literature, Language, Writing, and Philosophy Department. And I'm speaking as chair of the Black History Month Committee. And on behalf of the Black History Month Committee and the Library College at Florham, I welcome you to the Politics on the Public Mind series. We are truly honored to have the Reverend Reginald T. Jackson as this week's guest speaker. I am looking forward so much to his presentation. Professor Peter Woolley, the executive director of the Public Mind Research Center, has allowed me to come up here and take a minute to inform you of the next event in our very full Black History Month calendar. Coming up next Tuesday, the 22nd at 7 p.m. is a Hot Topics panel entitled What Racism Looks Like Today. Professor Kate Dunsmore from Communication will be moderating the panel. Professors Kathleen Haspel and Randall Westbrook will be on the panel, along with FDU alumna Ms. Tracy Gray Walker. She is Senior Vice President at AXA Equitable and Chief Diversity Officer there. So she'll be discussing her experiences as well. This is an interactive event. Hot Topics is a monthly panel that really relies on the audience to give questions and get a discussion going. These panelists are not going to talk at you. So the audience is encouraged and expected to participate. We have many more events still to follow, so please see me after the program if you are interested in picking up your very own personal Black History Month calendar. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Antoinette Miles. Antoinette is, among many things, an accomplished writer and president of the Melodies of Heaven Gospel Choir here on campus. And Antoinette is the kind of student that makes we faculty proud to be associated with this university. Antoinette.
Thank you, Professor Singer, for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Politics on the Public Mind series. This is our second presentation in the series on New Jersey politics. Next in the series on February 24th is Chris Daggett, former candidate for New Jersey governor in 2009 and president and CEO of the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation. He will be talking about what's wrong with the two-party system. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our guest speaker, Reverend Reginald T. Jackson. Despite not holding a position in public office, Reverend Jackson is considered perhaps the most influential African American in New Jersey. A native of Dover, Delaware, Reverend Jackson is a graduate of Delaware State University with a bachelor's degree in history and political science. He also studied at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and attained a master's in divinity. Since 1981, Reverend Jackson served as pastor of St. Matthew African Methodist Episcopal Church in Orange, New Jersey. In addition to his pastoral responsibilities, Reverend Jackson serves on numerous boards. He is chairman of the Board of Trustees of Essex County College, member and former president of the Board of Education of the Orange Public Schools, member of the Board of United Way, the Newark Alliance, and a life member of the NAACP. Reverend Jackson also serves as longtime executive director of the Black Ministries Councils of New Jersey, which represents more than 600 churches statewide. As executive director of the BMC, Reverend Jackson has been outspoken on almost every important issue in the state of New Jersey, particularly those that affect African Americans and other minorities. Predatory lending practices, community reinvestment by banks, charity care for the uninsured, auto insurance, smart guns, and racial profiling are among the issues that Reverend Jackson has addressed. In recent years, Reverend Jackson has been most critical of the state of education in New Jersey, the issues of which he's speaking about today. As a staunch advocate for school reform, Reverend Jackson has fought for increased funding for the state's 31 Abbott school districts, improved instruction, increased standards, and the reform of tenure and standardized testing in the state. Reverend Jackson is also a supporter of charter schools and the school voucher system. A question and answer session will be facilitated at the end of Reverend Jackson's presentation. If you have a question, please identify yourself and a microphone will be handed to you. Once you ask your question, please kindly hand the microphone back to the facilitator, as there are many people in the audience who may want to ask a question. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Reverend Reginald T. Jackson.
Good afternoon. To Professor Singer, let me thank you for the welcome. Professor Woolley for getting me into this. And let me thank Antoinette for the very kind and gracious introduction and for sharing lunch with me today. Let me say I am absolutely delighted to be here at Fairleigh Dickinson University today. I am just intrigued as to how I got invited to come up to this distinguished university. And I said when I walked into the room, I felt like the president holding a press conference in the East Room of the White House. I hope I do as well as he does. But let me say I'm also delighted to have a chance to talk about the issue which you've asked me to talk about today, and that is the issue making the case for radical school reform. Let me say a couple of things which you have heard a lot about, and that's going to be the basis of my talk today. In fact, and I'm going to try my best not to talk too long because I want to give you the opportunity to be able to ask questions. New Jersey, highest graduation rate in the nation. New Jersey's great schools. 99% of New Jersey's teachers highly certified. These are the claims of New Jersey's public schools. The question is, are any of them true? The more important, in fact, most important question is, are our children with all of these boasts receiving a quality education? I contend that none of the statements that you've heard, which I just made, are true. I also contend that we really have no idea how well our students are doing in our public schools, whether or not they are in fact receiving a quality education. It is for this reason that I really believe that New Jersey has got to be about radical school reform. Let me make the case for why I believe radical school reform is necessary. When I came to New Jersey in 1979, and I must say every time I think about when I came to New Jersey, I discover how really ignorant I was. They told me to get off, I was assigned to Jersey City. They told me to get off at exit 14C on New Jersey Turnpike. And coming up Turnpike to New Jersey, northern New Jersey for the first time, I saw the big sign saying Grand Street. I looked to my right and I saw all of these large, impressive glass structures, and I said, boy, I am going to an awesome place. I saw those structures and I saw the sign saying Grand Street. Out of my ignorance, I had no idea I was looking at New York City. And when I got to the bottom of exit 14C on Grand Street, it was nothing but concrete and housing projects. And for the almost 30 years that I've been in New Jersey, the state has been claiming it's going to reform the public schools in order to close the achievement gap between white and minority students and the gap between students from suburbs and rural areas of the state and those who attend schools in the state's urban centers. For almost 30 years, I have and you've been hearing about how they're going to reform the public schools. And during much of that time, I made a serious effort to join with them in reforming the public school. In fact, one of the New Jersey Education Association's initiatives, entitled FAST, Family and Schools Together, was my proposal to Bob Benazzi, who was then the executive director of the NJEA. I supported and worked with the Education Law Center in support of more funding for the 31 Abbott school districts. The Black Ministers Council even filed an amicus brief with the state Supreme Court in support of parity funding, which the court ordered in the mid-1990s, resulting in the state spending billions of dollars in the Abbott districts to close the achievement gap. Included with the additional funding was the state's preschool program. In fact, the state Supreme Court ordered half-day preschool for all of the students. Governor Whitman, to her credit, decided that it ought to be full-day preschool. And for every year, since the mid-1990s up until last year, funding for the 31 Abbott districts increased by millions, take it back, by millions and millions of dollars. State spending in the Abbott districts on average equaled more than $15,000 per student in Abbott districts, and in some districts, particularly Newark, more than $23,000 per student. In fact, Newark spends more to educate a student than any other city in the world. In addition, New Jersey spends more on education than any other state in the nation. With all this funding, what have we gotten? The results have been more than disappointing. The achievement gap between whites and minorities, between suburban, rural, and urban schools has not been closed, and in many areas has in fact widened. Not only has it widened, but the state and education unions have masterminded what I believe is a massive cover-up and a fraud perpetrated on the citizens of this state about the failure of our public schools. And so in my remarks, I want to try to pull the covers off of this cover-up. You received a copy of a handout a few minutes ago, and I did that because I am convinced that the overwhelming majority of parents in the state of New Jersey have absolutely no idea what's happening with the education of their children, or in fact what is actually true about public education in this state. As I just jotted down these questions because since you all are going to ask me some questions in a few minutes, I just thought I would beat you to the punch and ask you some questions myself and see where you are. So let me just, how many in this room know what the HSPA is? Raise your hand. All right, very good, very good. All right. How many know how many times a student gets to take the HESPA in order to graduate? Raise your hand. All right. Less. All right. Anybody know what grade level assessment the HESPA test really is? What grade level would you say it is? Huh? All right. I'll come back to that. Anybody know what percentage is required to pass the math part of the test? She's on the roll, yes. All right, I'll come back to that. Anybody know what percentage is required to pass the language part of the test? All right. Anybody know what the SRA is? All right. Anybody know what the AHSA is? All right. All right. That's a good thing I'm not grading this test this afternoon. All right, let me comment. The HSPA, commonly called the HESPA, is the High School Proficiency Assessment. I lift this up because, again, I think overwhelming majority of parents, citizens in this state have no idea what is happening with our public schools. And we hear New Jersey talk about New Jersey's great schools, and New Jersey having the highest graduation rate in the nation. And 99% of New Jersey's teachers are highly certified. So let me comment. In the 11th and 12th grade, students get 3 chances to pass the HESPA. In the 11th and 12th grade, you get 3 chances to pass the HESPA. And in order to graduate from high school in New Jersey, the law requires that a student has to pass the HESPA. And so in the 11th and 12th grade, you get 3 chances to pass it. This is the high school proficiency assessment. Yet, very, very few parents in the state know that the HESPA is really an 8th grade level assessment. So in the 11th and 12th grade, you get 3 chances to pass an 8th grade level assessment. So first of all, you're not being required to pass a high school level assessment. Now, interestingly enough, New Jersey does not use terms that a lot of other states use. They don't use pass or fail. New Jersey uses the term proficient, or highly proficient, or advanced proficient. They don't say you fail. They say you are not proficient. And so in order to pass or to be proficient on the math part of the test, all you have to score is 47%. To be proficient in math, all you need score is 47%. In other words, less than half. On the language part of the test, all you need to score in order to be proficient is 50%, or get half of them right. And so when New Jersey claims that we have these great schools, the standard to be proficient is so low. Now, it ought to scare us that the standards are so low to pass an 8th grade level assessment. Now, let me add to that. What is the SRA? They got rid of the SRA last year. But the SRA was what they call the Special Review Assessment. If you took the HESPA 3 times and you didn't pass, they had an alternate exam called the Special Review Assessment, which is really nothing more than a dummied-down way of graduating. And what is most frightening about the SRA is that the SRA, nobody knows what's on it. In other words, the same school that you attended gave you the SRA, and the same teachers who taught you during the time you were in high school also gave you the test. Those same teachers also corrected the test. Now, to give you an idea of why this is a problem, in 2009 in the city of Newark, and I'm not going to give the name of the high school, but one of the high schools in the city of Newark, they had a graduating class of 313 students. If you subtracted from those 313 students those who graduated by the SRA, that graduating class would be 16. Let me repeat that again. In 2009, at one of the high schools in the city of Newark, there was a graduating class of 313 students. If you subtracted the students who graduated by the SRA, that graduating class would have been 16 students. Okay? Now, to give you a reason why this, an example of why this is so important, New Jersey brags it has the highest graduation rate in the nation, that there's no other state in the nation who has the highest percentage of its students graduate than the state of New Jersey. Technically, that is true. But if you subtract those who graduated by the SRA, New Jersey goes from having the highest graduation rate in the nation to being 24th. That's how many students graduated by the SRA. Now, the bottom, what is the AHSA? There are some of us who have been just beating up on the State Board of Education, Department of Education. We demanded that they abolish the SRA because it was a dummy-down way of graduating. And so under the last year, the Corzine administration, they promised to put in place a new test to get rid of the SRA. So they came up with what is called the Alternative High School Assessment, the AHSA. And so last year, for the first time, students who did not pass the HESPA got to take the Alternative High School Assessment. Now, under the SRA, which everybody took before, 97% of students who took the SRA passed. 97% of students who took the SRA passed. Under the alternative high school, and the SRA was graded by the teachers in the district to which the student attended. Last year, for the first time, they took the alternative high school assessment, an alternative test. This time, the alternative high school assessment was given and graded by a firm out of Minnesota, a firm outside of the state. Across the state, there were 9,000 students who did not pass the HESPA. So there were 9,000 students who took the alternative high school assessment. Now hold on to your chairs. Of the 9,000 students who took the alternative high school assessment, 90% of them failed. 9 out of every 10 students failed. And interestingly enough, you did not read about that in the state's newspapers, because the Department of Education, much to my chagrin, and they received some angry phone calls from me, did not make that public. And the reason they did not make that public, and I've stated to them, and I stated again, I am convinced if most of these students who flunked the HESPA and who then flunked the alternative high school assessment, if most of those had been students who came out of what were the 31 Abbott districts, predominantly minority low-income districts, if in fact most of them had come out of those districts, it would have been made public. But the fact of the matter is these 9,000 students were across the state and in supposedly some of the best school districts in the state. And so it was not made public. And then what the state did, the state went out of its way to come up with some alternative means by which these students could graduate. So that if you passed the SAT but you flunked the HESPA and the alternative test, you graduated. They came up with a whole bunch of different scenarios by which students could graduate. And so the 9,000 students who were not supposed to graduate because they failed the HESPA and the alternative test was whittled down to about 3,000. All right? Now, it ought to raise some serious questions as to why in the previous years under the SRA, when those tests were given and graded by teachers in those local school districts, why 97% of students passed. But when the test was given and graded by a firm outside of New Jersey, you had all of those students who failed, and then 90% of them failed the alternative assessment. And what made it even more troubling to me, my good friend, the former governor, Governor Corzine, appointed a lady on the State Board of Education who used to be the president of the New Jersey Education Association. This board member made the mistake of saying at a New Jersey State Board of Education meeting, you get what you pay for. If we had gotten somebody in New Jersey to grade this test, more students would have passed. Okay? I think that in and of itself alone makes the argument as to why there has got to be reform of our public school system. It is troubling to me that we boast about New Jersey's great schools. First, we boast we have the highest graduation rate in the nation. I think the reason for why we have the highest graduation rate is because the standards are so low. Then we claim New Jersey has these great schools, and it bothers me because when you talk about New Jersey's great schools, it's almost as if we are in denial, because New Jersey has over 200 failing public schools. And so when we brag about New Jersey's great schools, it's almost as if we are not including those schools. And when we talk about failing schools, these are schools which have chronically failed over a long number of years. And so when we talk about charter schools, and if you have a charter school, this state will close down a charter school in the blink of an eye. But you almost have to cross the Red Sea to get this state to close down a failing public school. And the debate today in New Jersey is not about the failing public schools. The great debate centered around reform today is really about money. It's not about the fact that kids are not learning. It is about money. I'm convinced that the reason we have 200 failing schools is not because of students. I hear all of this discussion about problematic students, and particularly in your low-income districts, particularly among minorities, it's always the student and the parents' fault as to why the children are not learning. And that is so absolutely inaccurate, because there are overwhelming examples of students who were attending public schools and failing. In my congregation, I have students who were attending public schools and failing, but parents wanting their children to do better went and got a second job in order to pay for their children to go to another school. And those are now B students doing well in school. Students who were problem students in the public school, now model students in other schools. I'm convinced that the problem is not the students. I'm convinced the problem are the schools and really the quality of instruction. If you put a child in an environment which is not conducive to learning, it makes it much more difficult for that child to learn. But you put them in an environment where education can take place, most of those children do well. I hear us talk about parents and parents don't do this and parents don't do that. The reality is, in many of our urban centers, in Newark, Camden, East Orange, Patterson, and many of our urban districts today, what we fail to acknowledge is that most of the parents and some of the grandparents are those whom these systems failed 25 to 30 years ago. And you cannot blame people for not doing what they don't know to do. New Jersey claims that 99% of its teachers are highly certified. Now, this is absolutely laughable, because the reality is 99% of the teachers are highly certified. In 2009, we do not have the numbers for 2010, but in 2009, 47% of the new teachers could not pass the state praxis. Now, 47% of new teachers can't pass the exam for teaching in New Jersey. How possibly can 99% of them be highly qualified? It's not possible. And, you know, my congregation at St. Matthew would tell you that their pastor does not have good sense, because he does not know that some things you should not say in some settings. Because I've said to my folk at St. Matthew Church, where I have teachers, I've said to them, there are some teachers in this congregation who I would not allow to teach my son. Because I believe that quality instruction is that important that you've got to be able to weed out poor teachers. Now, I believe New Jersey has some of the finest teachers anywhere in the nation. But I also know that New Jersey has some of the poorest teachers anywhere in the nation. The former president of the NJEA and I'm not going to call her name, but the former president of the NJEA and I, back when she was president before she left 2 years ago, used to have lunch once a quarter. And so I said to her, I said, you know, we got to do something to improve the quality of instruction. And we got to do something to get rid of bad teachers. And she said, I agree. And I said, okay, so we got to reform tenure. She said, say what? I said, we got to reform tenure. I said, one of the reasons why school districts do not bring tenure charges against poor teachers is because local school districts cannot afford it. Today in New Jersey, to bring tenure charges against a teacher, and it's not a matter of whether or not you win, just to bring the charges and take it through the process will cost you on average between $110,000 to $150,000. One case. And you know, New Jersey had this system that makes it, I mean, you're talking about a bureaucratic setup. If you bring tenure charges, it goes to the administrative law judge. The administrative law judge may agree with you. So then the person can appeal to the Commissioner of Education. The Commissioner of Education may agree with you. Well, then they can appeal to the State Board of Education. State Board of Education may agree with you, and you may think, good, we finally won. No, then they can go through some other courts. And by the time you finish, you have almost bankrupted the district trying to get rid of one bad teacher. And I'm telling you, tenure is a terrible system. I serve even now on the Orange Board of Education. Last year we had a teacher who told a student to take one of the school district's televisions, put it in a box, and put it in his car. Two students put TV in the box, go into the car, security guard stopped them, saw the television, reported it. So when the board met, they were going to suspend the two students and suspend the teacher without pay. And I argued, why would you suspend the students? We teach them, do what your teachers tell you to do. I said, but we need to suspend this teacher without pay. The board attorney tapped me on the shoulder and said, Reverend Jackson, you can't do that. I said, why? He said, well, the law is in New Jersey, if a teacher has tenure, the only way they can be suspended is with pay. I said, you mean they can go home and sit home and look at our television and still get paid? And he said, that's right, because they got tenure. You have no idea how much I wish they had tenure for preachers. And then let me say, which is the ultimate thing about why we've got to have radical reform. Every year at the high school graduations across the state, some of them I'm invited to speak at. Orange Board of Education, I attend the graduation. And at every graduation, as I see the students march across the stage, I am saddened and wonder in my mind how many students are getting a diploma but who don't have an education. I serve as the chairman of the Board of Trustees at Essex County College. And I see firsthand every year the tragedy of students with a diploma but not an education. Every year I have resonating in my ear the boast about New Jersey's great schools. And the NJEA, and I know they did this to get at me, and they succeeded. I want them to know they succeeded. Last year, they put up a billboard every morning when I would get in my car and drive to my office at the church. They had on the corner of Central Avenue and Oakwood Avenue and Orange, a great big billboard. I saw it every blessed morning. Great big billboard, New Jersey, highest graduation rate in the nation. If I could have tore that billboard down and not have gone to jail, I would have done it. I just don't look good in black and white. Well, I got on black and white today, don't I? Yeah. But anyway, but I know why they put that billboard there. But the problem is we have too many students getting diplomas without an education. Let me give you an example. New Jersey has a program called New Jersey Stars. On the New Jersey Stars, it used to be the top 20%, now it's the top 15% of kids in the graduating class. The state will pay your tuition to any community college in the state. At Essex County College, 80% of the New Jersey Stars need remedial help. These are those who graduate in the top 15%. They are the stars. If 80% of the stars need remedial help, what does that say about the rest of those who are graduating? And let me say to you, that's not just a problem in urban districts. That's a problem when you speak with folk at community colleges across the state. That is a problem at community colleges across the state. Essex County College spends 25% of its budget on remedial education. Every year I speak with students who come back from colleges angry because they got a diploma and went to college. Some of them had scholarships only to get to college and discover that they were not ready for college. Many of them lose their scholarships because they are not ready for college. They got a diploma, but they don't have an education. My brothers and my sisters, we have got to reform the public schools. There has got to be tenure reform. We need to do away with tenure. I hope there's nobody here in the union, but we got to do away with tenure. And I said to the governor some months ago, we ought to give teachers contracts for 5 years, and every 5 years you have to get your contract renewed. But if you get tenure, 3 years and a day, and you get tenure and it's for a lifetime, that means that every single kid in that class can flunk for every single year, but there's no consequence. And I have had students who've come to Orange Board of Education meetings cussing out me and others on the Board of Education because a teacher told them, I don't care whether you learn or not, I still get paid. We have got to, if you're going to be serious about reforming the public schools, the first thing got to go has got to be tenure. Education ought not be the only place where accountability does not matter. Second, we ought to deal with merit pay. Again, when I had breakfast with the former president of the NJEA, I said to her, I said, we ought to consider merit pay because some of these teachers teach in some very difficult situations and they're doing miraculous things, and we ought to compensate them. It ought to be merit pay. And she said, absolutely not, because all our teachers are good. I said, all of them? She said, every single one of them. I said, well, let's do this. I said, I got a proposal for you. I knew she was going to say that, which is why I set her up. I said, I got a proposal. All your teachers are good? She said, all of them are good. I said, okay, let's do this. I said, let's take the teachers in a high-performing district, and for 1 year, let them go teach in a low-performing district. And I said, let's take the teachers in a low-performing district, let them go teach in a high-performing district for 1 year. I said, what you say about that? She must have forgot I was a preacher. She said, hell no. I said, but all your teachers are good. She said, they ain't all that good. So we got to do away with tenure, and we've got to have merit pay. Finally, we need to expand charter schools, and we ought to have school choice. I wrap it up by simply saying, my brothers and my sisters, I believe you have to do both. I believe you have to reform the public school because most of our children are always going to go to the public school. That's just a fact. Most of our children going to always go to public school. So you have to reform the public school. But also believe that parents ought to have alternatives and options. If the school that your child is going to is not giving your child a good education, you ought to have some options, because a quality education is the equalizer. I close. I absolutely love Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King, as much as people talk about his dream and all of that, he said something else which I think is more important than what he said about a dream, and which tragically has become true. Martin Luther King said in 1967, he said that in the next century, discrimination will not be primarily based upon race. It will be based upon economics. And whoever does not have a good education in this highly technological age will have no standing in society. Tragically, he is absolutely correct. And even more tragic, that's where too many of our children are, who graduated from our schools and a diploma but no education, and who have no standing in our society. I'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you again, Reverend Jackson, for speaking with us this afternoon. My name is Selena Reedy, and Rejan and I will be facilitating your questions. If you could just raise your hand so I can see you. we will try to get everyone's questions in.
Oh, no questions. Wonderful.
I will be starting the questions.
No,
My question for you, Reverend Jackson, is why did you not support Governor Corzine with the same enthusiasm the second time around as you did originally?
And one thing I try to do is be honest with folk. I'm your friend when I agree with you, and I'm your friend when I disagree with you. But I think if I'm going to be your genuine friend, I'll also tell you when I think you're wrong. And I just wanted him to know on the issue of education, he was wrong. And so therefore it was hard for me to be excited.
Thank you. I'm going to throw this question over to Reginald.
Thank you for your presentation, Reverend Jackson. One of my questions is, other than tenure reform, what other steps and measures can the state government take to reform the public school system?
Well, one, I think is merit pay. I do think that there are some teachers, and let me say again, I think New Jersey has some absolutely fantastic teachers. And I think those teachers, particularly in difficult situations where students are making progress, I think they ought to receive merit pay. And so I think in addition to tenure reform, there's got to be merit pay. Third thing, which I think we need to do, and I know it's going to create an uproar and great debate, I think we have to also find some means of parity in terms of how we compensate teachers. For example, one of the reasons why I'm convinced that many teachers in urban districts are, we may have teachers who do their best but are not the best. And for example, in many urban districts, you may get, say, a student who graduates from Fairleigh Dickinson University, and say there are 250 teachers in the graduating class. In the urban districts, you may get the teacher who ranked the student who ranked 238th out of 250. Because by and large, people are still going to go where they're going to get the best compensation. And so if the salary in Short Hills is much more than, say, the salary in Orange, your best teachers are going to go to Short Hills. And so we can find some way to try to reach some kind of parity in how we compensate teachers. I also think that will improve the quality of instruction in districts across the state.
What reforms do you think Mark Zuckerberg was told Newark would work on with the monies that he gave? I'm sure he didn't just give it without some sort of an outline of reform. Do you know what the reforms are, and where is the status at this moment on that money? And I think there was matching funds in order to get it going.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just wish I was in the conversation. I'm not sure what he was told. I do know from conversation that I've had with Mayor Booker that Zuckerberg is in fact looking for some specific recommendations, and I think Newark made one big mistake that took, I forget how much, on a study or a poll or something of residents in the city, which came back really without any comprehensive results. But I am sure the very first thing has got to be quality instruction. The very first thing, and I say I don't care what district it is, the first thing has got to be quality instruction. If I am amazed that there has not been a riot in Newark because of its education. I say that because when I came to New Jersey, and I think it was in 1985 or 87, I picked up the Star Ledger one morning and it said that 78% of students in Newark failed to reach a minimum state standard. I said, oh, it's going to be a riot in Newark today. There was hardly a whimper. Some years later, the state took over the Newark schools and they got rid of 600 people who had patronage jobs. That's when they almost had to riot. Not about education, but about the jobs. And so I'm convinced that the first thing has got to be improving instruction. Newark as poor as its academic results are, most people don't realize that Newark has the highest paid teachers in the state. The average salary in Newark is about $74,000.
Following your point about the highest paid teachers are the best quality, when Newark has such high quality, high paid teachers, and you're saying they're not producing results. That was one question. And also you said there was a high cost per student compared to other districts that have lower cost and yet you feel higher quality instruction. And then my second question was where you talked about New Jersey, and I could understand your parameter, you're criticizing the parameter that they're claiming they're so great on. However, there are some other parameters that indicate New Jersey has a good educational system overall. Its performance on the national merit, where the score in New Jersey is considerably higher than other states to get a scholarship. So that indicates our students are better. So, and then my last thing is, what state would you benchmark against because you think they do a good job of educating all the students?
Okay, now that's 4 questions, but I think I got them.
Sorry.
Number one, I do not necessarily think because teachers are high paid that they would be effective. Now, what I am saying is, and I think Newark is in fact a good example, but what I am saying is where you have teachers who have demonstrated that students in fact are learning, they ought to be compensated. So that's number one. You know, you have to demonstrate first before you get the compensation. Number two, as it relates to, I'm trying to think what the second question was now. Let me come to the third. As it relates to which states I would compare, I think there's several states that New Jersey could be compared to in terms of really, one, believe it or not, is a small state that I love dearly, and I'm not partial to it. Just has to be my home state of Delaware. I think Delaware is one example. Delaware, in a whole random of examples, students do well, which is number one. But also there is another state where the students really do extremely well, and that is in the state of Montana. And I think those two states would be good barometers for New Jersey to look at. And part of that had to do with class size and that kind of thing. Because I think one of the other problems New Jersey has is the size of our classes, which also impacts the quality of instruction. Your third question, I think, had to do with other measurements. You mentioned some national tests where New Jersey does well. And let me say, I am not saying New Jersey does not have some good schools. New Jersey does have some good schools. My point is, you cannot say New Jersey's great schools when you've got 200 chronically failing schools as if like they don't exist. And what happens is, when you look at these national exams, the difference is on state assessments, every student takes the test. On some of these national exams, they're really samples where a majority of students in the state do not take the assessments. So that's why the best measurement still remains your state assessments. I think I got all of them, but I ain't sure. Okay.
Reverend Jackson, just wanted to say thank you very much for your speech. My name is Chad Faulkner. In your personal opinion, what's the best way for us to educate the parents, since they are really the most important to realize what's going on with what you said today? What's the best way for us to educate the parents that they know what's going on in the public school system and they can put out their voice to the Board of Ed so we can get a reform?
You know, one of the things which has got to happen, and let me say a word first of all about parents in urban school districts. Many parents in urban school districts, with all of the problems, it's not that those parents don't care. Many of those parents are so intimidated of the system because what happened when they themselves went through. Part of, I believe, the problem with the public school system, which gives me problems with organizations who I love but who I think are absolutely wrong, and that's like the ACLU. One of the great challenges facing the public school system is it requires nothing of parents. In a private school, for example, if you want your child in this school, there are some things parents have to do. In a public school system, if a student gets suspended and the board says this child cannot come back to school unless the parent comes with him, if that parent doesn't come, by law, you got to put that child back in school. The public school system requires nothing of parents. And I think as long as that remains, you're going to have difficulty with some sets of parents. So that's the first thing. The state had to require something. Second thing, I think the schools have to find ways to involve parents in their children's education where in fact parents don't feel intimidated. Now, I have a young son, and you know, I'm doing all I can now, like to help him with homework. Because I remember when I was a kid, my parents, and I'm convinced now my parents didn't have the foggiest idea what they were doing, but they fooled me like they did. See what I mean? And so what I do now, believe it or not, I actually go to some of the teachers at school to ask how you do this stuff. So when my son comes home, I can help him. And he says, my dad is smart. I ain't really, but I got him fooled. See what I mean? But we've got to find a way, because I think a lot of parents want to be involved, and I think they're trying to figure out how they can be.
You talked about how the standardized tests and the HESP are like relatively easy. Like you only need 47% to pass.
I didn't say they were easy. I just said that's the level they are.
Right, and like it doesn't seem like you need like an 8th grade. It's like relatively like an 8th grade level to pass. Do you think it would be better off making it a little bit harder, so the kids don't get a degree without the proper form of education? And if so, do you think like a tutoring program would be like in the budget, like before they fall into like the SRA, if possible?
Absolutely. You know, I think two things. One, I think education has got to come back to the point where the primary goal is not to get a kid out the door, but to make sure that when the kid goes out, the kid has an education. That in fact, that student is prepared for the world he or she is about to enter. I think that has got to be the goal and the aim of education. That's number one. Number two, again, and I remember back when I was in school, and this is not to knock the unions, but I do remember teachers stayed after school, and they wouldn't meet with students. If I had a problem, I could go see Miss Stevenson after school. She was there. Today, if school's out at 3:15, the teachers are gone at 3:15. And if parents need to see a teacher, in other words, we've got to find a way where in fact, whether it's tutoring, whether it's after school, whatever, kids and parents can get what they need. Today, everything is about, the contract says if I stay 10 minutes after you got to come and say to me, there's got to be some sacrifice on everybody's part. And let me also add, I think the other thing which is important for education, and I meant to say this in my remarks, we've got to get back to a point of teaching our children that just because something works doesn't make it right. I see now where, cheating and all this other stuff, you can get by. But there's very little character, very little principle, very little values.
Hi, my name is Robin Samuel. I'd like to say thank you for even more inspiration on becoming a teacher.
Thank you.
And my question is to you, why do you believe that the charter schools are closed? What is the key reasons of why the charter schools are closing?
And I think a lot of it was, in fact, to be blunt with you, political. I think the unions were not really supportive of charter schools. I think the administration of my friend, the former governor, too easily and too often bowed to the pressure of the union. And whereas, I give you this example. One day I had a meeting at the governor's office with the governor. It was about 8 of us in the room, and the governor came in. He had just come from Camden. He had been to Wilson High School in Camden, one of the failing schools, one of the worst schools in the state. And he came and sat down exasperated and talking about, I just came from Wilson. I don't know how anybody can have peace of mind knowing they got a kid in that school. And I said, well, Governor, you're doing a lot to help them stay there. And he looked up and said, oh, Reverend Jackson, I forgot you in this meeting. We're not going to discuss that today. See what I mean? And so I think, and until people really begin to stand up and I think education is a civil right. I think every child has a civil right to the best education they can get. And I'll be honest with you on this, I'm like Malcolm X, by any means necessary.
Hello, Pat Miller. Thank you so much. I'm someone who came in, failed your test completely, and I almost feel like a scholar on the subject now. I think we all have a lot of energy. I'm no longer a parent of children in school. Could you come up with 1 or 2 action steps that we can use this raised energy to move forward?
Yeah, one, I think, unfortunately, most parents in whatever school district across the state are really not informed. And I think we do a poor job of seeing the parents and citizens in these communities are informed. I absolutely guarantee you that at least 90%, if not more, of parents and citizens in New Jersey have no idea that the HESPA is an 8th grade level assessment. I think if more people realize, for example, that the United States itself ranks way down compared to other countries in terms of the quality of education that children receive, because that does not bode well for this nation going down the road. It's beginning to catch up with us now. And so I think information is really the key. And I think some of these school bureaucracies go out of the way and really genuinely believe that as little as parents know, the better off the school system itself is. And I continue to say, it's not about defending the school system, it's really about educating children. I say there's a friend of mine who used to be with an officer in the union, had a grandson who graduated from, attended school in East Orange. And they had a spelling contest, and her grandson won the spelling contest. She was so proud, and she went to the school when her grandson got presented the plaque. But lo and behold, on the plaque, one of the words was misspelled. And so she didn't fuss or rant, but she took the plaque back to school so they could correct the plaque. And the teacher said to her, oh, you one of those kind of parents. See what I mean? And so that's what I mean when I say, I'm convinced that the one thing most any parent wants, regardless of their own educational attainment, is for their children to do better than themselves. And so I think we need to see that parents and communities are really informed about what's happening in our schools.
I have a 2-part question. One, for instance, you said the teachers in Newark were highly paid, and they cost the most per student. What would it take, or would it take getting rid of tenure and merit pay to have the children of Newark educated as well as, say, a private school? And the other question part of it is, I know with my school, you can get very little information. It's all, hidden, or they don't want to give it. You go to the board, and if you ask a question, they say, well, I have to get back to you. But if they do get back to you, you get the answer, not the whole community.
Yeah, two things. One, as it relates to Newark, again, understand the most important place of instruction remains the home. Unfortunately, there's very little instruction occurring at home anymore. And secondly, as it relates to the school, I am thoroughly convinced that the issue is really the quality of instruction. And again, and I'm trying to say this as best as I can, we really do, I believe, in most of these districts, have teachers who do their best, but they themselves are not the best. And so several things have happened. One, our colleges and universities have also got to do a better job of preparing students. Because if they're not prepared by the time the district hires them, the district's not going to prepare them. Second, I think if you do away with tenure, this 5-year evaluation, that's going to force a teacher to stay on top of their game. I understand why teachers don't want this 5-year evaluation, because that means after 5 years, people are going to see what I've done. But that's the only way it's going to happen. Superintendents ought to be evaluated. Principals ought to be evaluated. Teachers ought to be evaluated. And second, as it relates to, see again, I think when it comes to Board of Education meetings, the strength is really in this PTAs and PTOs. There's so few parents in them that schools are no longer intimidated of them. And I remember when I was a kid growing up, those PTAs, parents went to those, and they could get on a school's nerve, because there was a time when schools were reluctant to see parents showing up, and they stayed on their toes. But so until we really revive and strengthen those organizations, it's going to be tough. Because in other words, you ought not have to wait for Board of Education. The PTA ought to insist that the principal or whoever come to the PTA meeting and answer some questions, because at the PTA meeting, you don't have the board attorney sitting there saying, well, the board doesn't have to give you the opportunity to speak at this meeting. But at the PTA, no, you answer to them now.
Well, thank you for your talk. It was very informative, and it's nice to hear actually the perspective of someone who's a reverend too, and supporting these new initiatives. I find that to be interesting.
Thank you.
Along the lines of what you've been saying about the problem not being the students but the quality of instruction, would you say that there really is a gap? You were talking about a gap, but a gap between schools and how we're even defining quality instruction. Because for one school, it's like, let's reduce the disruptions in the classroom and you're a quality teacher, versus another school where maybe we're going to integrate reading across the curriculum. So I wanted to know your thoughts on how we get started in defining quality instruction, which is big. That's a big question, so you can't really answer in a few minutes, but I wanted to throw that out there. And I also was curious to know if you've heard anything about a school. I saw a documentary about a week ago on a school in Massachusetts, a high school, I believe it was Brockton, one of the top schools in Massachusetts. I thought it was very interesting what they were doing. They were reforming the school, and they basically were implementing learning strategies across the curriculum. So it wasn't just about the content, but how the students produce the work and strategies that they would use in college as well. And what I found most interesting is that the principal was working hands-on with the teachers and having ongoing workshops. And it was this continuing learning process. So it wasn't just that the students were learning, but the teachers and the principal were involved in that process. I want to know your thoughts about that as well. Thank you.
To show you how I've not been altogether on target myself today, because really the most important person in that school is not the teacher. Really the most important person in that school is the principal. And New Jersey has what it calls core curriculum content standard. I'm convinced the real issue also is not curriculum is critical, but I think even more important than curriculum is the control or the environment in that school. I am convinced if the environment is conducive to learning, two things, and I'll be quiet. Some years ago, a friend of mine was just upset about what was happening at Central High School in Newark. And they were just carrying on about the kids. These kids are this, these kids are that, da da da. And so what happened was one of the professors at Rutgers in Newark, who was at the table with us having lunch, when lunch was over, he says, "Come on, I want y'all to go with me." And so we went by Central High School. We walked in Central High School, kids were in the hall, noise in the hall. You could hear upstairs the noise going on downstairs. It was just out of control. We got in his car, went a couple blocks up the street to St. Benedict's. Most of the kids at Central Avenue, African American. Most of the kids at St. Benedict, African American. Went in St. Benedict, halls were clear, halls were clean, halls were quiet. We got permission to go in some classrooms. Instruction was taking place. And when we left, all of us really concluded the problem wasn't the kids. The problem was school. Environment really does matter. I close by saying, reading, I say that about 4 years ago, I was going down Central Avenue in Orange on my way to Newark. And I got stopped at the corner of South Harrison and Central by traffic light. And there was a young guy I knew standing on the corner drinking a soda. And the light turned green, but just as the light turned green, I noticed this brother dropped, there was a trash can to his right. He dropped the can on the ground to his left. And I was livid, but the light had turned green. A few weeks later, I saw the same brother up at the Livingston Mall. He had a Baskin Robbins ice cream cup in his hand. I saw that crazy clown walk all the way across the hall in Livingston Mall to put that cup in the trash. And I was really angry with him at first, but then it dawned on me. Where he was defined or helped define his expectations, which said to him in East Orange, because this is tolerated, because this is acceptable, dropping this can on the ground is all right. But at the Livingston Mall, I just can't drop this cup on the floor. So he walked all the way across the hall to put it in the trash. I'm again convinced children live up or down to the expectations you set for them. And so if we expect much from our children, I think we'll get much. If we expect little, we'll get little. Thank you.